Thank you. Let's move on to push this forward from the desperate situation we're in to what the alternatives might be. So I'd like to go back to Jamie to start this off. Jamie, why is public higher education essential in the Depression? Let me break this out for a minute. As well as the protesters in Michigan with AR-15s, there are thousands of others who are the people that we quote the statistic all the time, that 40% of Americans would have trouble getting $400 together. Well, the crisis for that $400, that started 8 weeks ago. There's a lot of desperate people out there. So why is it that we think it's legitimate to focus on higher education, which is something that most people don't actually enjoy? Secondly, how can the federal government and state governments keep these colleges going through the crisis? What should we cut if it's not going to be the university, or are there alternatives? What do you think? How do you think about this whole problem? You're on mute.
Yes. First of all, higher education is not simply or uniquely something that you provide to a particular group of people in order for them to advance. It is a bulwark of the entire life of the nation. And it provides a basis for having an organized society going forward. There's simply no alternative to it for that purpose. And that's been known since the 17th century. It's not a new fact. It's certainly been a foundation of this country since the 19th century, at least. So let's just take that as a given. We need to have it. We're not going to be able to stop a major shrinkage of private higher education. Those institutions are simply, we don't control them. And so that's a much larger clientele is going to potentially need to have the access to public higher education, which we can preserve because it's a public function and we need to preserve it for that purpose. It's also a bulwark of the economy of the areas where we have many of our public universities, but they're a national asset that need to be preserved. You let them go to waste, they won't come back. And the question then is, what do you do in the short run? Now, it's clear that the virus and the health situation have forced some changes. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And particularly in the short run, just basically, when we're talking about bringing students back to pile them on top of each other in dormitories and stuff them into poorly ventilated classrooms, I suspect that administrators over the summer will come to their senses about that kind of thing. The fact is, the university isn't the buildings, it isn't the administrators, it's not the sport facilities. The university is the faculty. The university is the educational experience that's available and that it makes available. That's what needs to be preserved. It's a body of expertise, a repository of knowledge, a group of working people who teach and who do research and who interact with their students. There are lots of things that technology does make possible. I got through this semester with all of my classes and quite a lot of students, masters and undergraduate students, looking at them on the screen, and I didn't have a problem with that, frankly. I do have a problem with thinking you can compress large classes onto a screen. That doesn't work. So you need more people rather than less. Mm-hmm. And then you need to conserve the facilities so that maybe later on you can get them back into use. But right now, the important thing is to conserve the people and to keep the students learning and to keep the faculty employed in teaching. That's where the resource of the university is. The fact that it can be done, of course it can be done. Later on, then we'll need to see what's the role of the public university with the number of people that we need, who need to be there and all of that going forward. But I suspect that if we do this sensibly, the public university is going to be a much bigger piece of the picture later than it is now, because while some of the very highly funded private universities are obviously going to survive, I don't think that's a problem. A great many will not, and the core of the public sector, the public role here, as in many other areas, is going to be more important, not less important. Once we get past, assuming we get past this immediate emergency over the next year, 18 months, 2 years.
So, Luz, thinking about Jamie's comments, there's a short-run need to preserve the faculty more than the buildings. In the long run, we can worry about this. You've been fighting now, as you said, for a decade against the persistent assault on higher education. Is there anything in this moment that gives you hope that you can fight more effectively going forward to bring that vision that Jamie outlined into being?
So something that usually our president, Randy Wengard, says is that we need to take anger and transform it into action. And so I cannot emphasize enough the need for faculty, teachers, educators around the country to either join their local union or form a union in their workplace. For years, faculty has seen the norms of shared and deliberate governance disappeared. We have usually no power in the decisions that they are making up top. But however, if you join a union, that can change. So what we have been seeing is that there's consolidation of administrative power in the hands of corporate executives. Our universities, like I said before, they are being run like corporations. They're not being run as institutions for higher learning. With little appreciation for transparency or inclusiveness and little understanding of the academy's mission, these managers increasingly make decisions behind closed doors and execute them from above. Teachers throughout the state of Wisconsin are organizing through AFT to fight back these bad decisions. We're writing letters of opposition in every regional university, campus, colleges. We're getting involved in our local politics to make sure that pro-education leaders get elected. We just got elected Tony Evers as our governor. I mean, we defeated Scott Walker after 8 long years of organizing, but we did it, and it matters now, especially. We have asked Governor Evers to hold on evictions when we knew a lot of our students were losing their homes. And yesterday, the governor just announced $25 million to support renters in the state of Wisconsin. So even though we don't have the state legislature or the Senate in Wisconsin, we do have that one seat that can really make a big difference. And so thanks to our unions and organizing, we're able to work on local politics and make sure that these people get elected and hold them accountable once they get elected. That's the most important part, because a lot of people can get elected. They can say they're pro-public education, but then at the end they're not. And so we want to make sure that with our unions, we get involved not just in our workplaces, but also influence in our local politics. And so our unions give us a voice that we wouldn't otherwise have. And I invite you all to join your local unions, and also, form a union if you don't have one, to fight back. The union is what makes us powerful. And so a lot of people think that unions are part of the past, and that's not the case. This is the time for us to organize and have a voice and be stronger more than ever.
Thank you. Stephanie, I'd like to bring you in now. You've just written this book, The Deficit Myth, a game changer, in my opinion, that everybody on this call should go out and buy, because it basically tells you what really goes on with big federal budgets, which is different from state budgets, as you know. Now, here's the question. The feds are out there running deficits that they said they could never possibly do, and the markets have barely moved, if at all. They don't want to finance state budgets, but they do want to bail out corporations. What's going on with that? Why can't they do this? What's the real limits, if there are any? And finally, if you could, tell us something about this Federal Reserve Program, the municipal lending facility, because it seems that once again the Fed is daring to go. The Fed is daring to go where Congress won't. Or am I overreading that? So if you can unpack that stuff for everyone, because it's really important stuff.
Okay, well, I'll do my best, recognizing that we've got a lot more ground to cover and not a lot of time. That was a lot, Mark. Yeah.
But we're doing okay on time. I've been pushing us forward.
So let's take the first question, which is about the potential for Congress to do what I think really is the right way to go about getting aid to state and local governments. And that is to do it directly and to basically, let's say, write the check, okay, to provide money directly to state and local governments and alleviate the strain that they're facing in terms of their own budgets. This would help them continue to fund education and a whole variety of other public services across the country at the state level. So how can they do that? Well, they do it exactly the same way they did it for the airlines or the cruise lines or the small businesses or anybody else, right? You write a bill, and in that bill, you specify the amount of money that you're designating to go to state and local governments. Congress votes for it, and voila, the spending is financed. Okay, so look, the House just passed a bill, $3 trillion, right? The Senate has indicated that they're not interested. Mitch McConnell has indicated that he's perfectly happy to watch states continue to struggle, let them declare bankruptcy, all these kinds of comments that he has made. If the Senate had a different opinion of things and was willing to pass the bill and provide funding to state and local governments, the money would be there. That's where it would come from. Okay, you mentioned the Fed, and yes, the Fed is doing more, but it ain't the same. And when Fed Chairman Jerome Powell goes out there and reminds people that the Fed can lend, but it can't spend, that is a very big difference. What the Fed can do is help state and local governments finance their spending, but they have to borrow. Okay, so this requires states to take on debt in an environment where their budgets are collapsing. And many governors, including our governor here in the state of New York, has already said, I don't want to paper over the problem. I'm not interested in loading up on debt in order to try to survive through this crisis. So what they are asking for, and I think this is exactly what they deserve and what we should be providing, is a grant, not a loan. Get them the money that they need. Do it through Congress, not through the Federal Reserve. That way they own the money free and clear. They don't have to pay it back. We take care of shortfalls in the immediate term. And there's the limit, as you said, is the willingness of Congress to vote for the spending. If Congress were to authorize too much spending, the punishment would show up in the form of inflationary pressures. We are not looking at an environment in which providing aid to state and local governments is going to set off an inflationary spiral. We have a depressed economy. We can safely provide the financial aid that states are desperately begging for, and we can do it in a way that while it increases the deficit, it doesn't pose other risks to the economy.
Thanks. Bringing Jeffrey in to round this one out, just to move down again to the sort of the micro level on this. We mentioned earlier the threat to traditional, let's say, departments, disciplines, and also even interdisciplinary learning, the more academic side, if you will, of the university. What seems to be popular, at least in this moment of stress, is this notion of workforce development, using this as an excuse in a sense to turn universities into ITT institutes. What's behind that, and why do you think that's come up in this moment?
Yeah, Mark, I mean, that's a really important and really essential point in the discourse that we've seen surrounding public education and what it should do, higher education, in the most recent years, and especially with this particular crisis. You know, as Luz says, our public universities are being run like corporations, but I would go even further and say they're being run like very badly organized corporations that have been subject to hostile takeovers and where the equity is being drawn down and necessary investments are not being made. So it's a very, very bad situation in which our management, to use that term to describe the people who are really running our public higher education institutions, and by that I mean our board of regents, which are appointed by our governors, and they have to be voted on by our state legislatures, are not interested in education, and oftentimes they're really quite hostile to it. And there's a disregard in the Republican Party for education, I think, unfortunately. And many of our state legislatures have been frankly captured. They've been gerrymandered to a grotesque extent, and they really don't reflect the popular public vote in many of the states in which they actually control these institutions. But they dislike the humanities, they dislike the social sciences, and they dislike anything that they deem to be impractical. What's practical? Well, anything that subsidizes a business, frankly, and provides a subsidy that can result in some short-term cash out for themselves. And we've heard this kind of anti regard for this disregard for higher education and culture, and humanities, and the social sciences before. Nikita Khrushchev, the former USSR, would bang on about the need for more strictly technical education and workforce development, more stripped out of the humanities and the social sciences. And similar sentiments were expressed in Mao's Cultural Revolution China. Now, the last time I checked, neither of these experiments created innovation economies. Instead, just the opposite. They created, economies that weren't very creative or innovative in their thinking. We need to create a larger ecosystem of creativity and innovation, if that's in fact what our state legislatures are actually trying to deliver. And we need to bear in mind, where creativity and innovation comes from. Thinking about Steve Jobs, Apple computer, of course, the late Steve Jobs, who once famously remarked when he was asked about what college course imparted the most value to him or was the biggest inspiration for him when he was creating his graphics-based Mac or Apple computer platform. And he said Japanese calligraphy. So I think there is a counterintuitive development, or rather a dimension to innovation and creativity that our state legislators often overlook in terms of creating the very kinds of economies that they purport to want to create. In short, or in sum, I think it's just very clear. I mean, they've stated what they want. They want to train people. They want obedient people. They don't want people who can think. And they want to offload that cost of training their people onto the students themselves through higher tuition and the public through whatever subsidies that they can extract from them to run these institutions. But to do so, again, at increasingly lean level, so that levels of taxation are kept at the absolute minimum.
Right. Thank you. Jamie, just bringing this whole section home then, what can college and university faculty and students start doing now to demonstrate the value of public higher education in every community in America and to build support for our mission as teachers and research leaders? What can we concretely do? Well, Luz has suggested join a union, wholeheartedly agree. But beyond that, what can we do on an individual level and how can we amplify the importance of what we're doing?
Well, I think we need to express in a realistic way what the historical role and achievement of higher education, and especially higher education, the land-grant college system and all of that was in this country. I don't think anybody ever moved to a community to live there because it had a good technical institute, because it had a good job training center. This is not the reason, and it's not the main economic effect of higher education. I live in Austin, Texas. Why did I come here? Why does anybody come here? Because it's a great community. It has a wide-ranging, spectrum of talents in art and architecture and music and cultural life of all kinds, as well as being able to be, and that's why it's an attractive place for the tech centers that have come here. Not so much because you can bring in engineers. The engineers are great. Of course, we train a lot of them, but that's not the reason. I mean, yes, the university provides a scientific base for that, but it's the whole spectrum of things that higher education has brought. You don't have it, the country will collapse to a number of major centers, like on the coast will be where people go, and that's the country built out by creating these stable places all across the country, that of which the higher education was the anchoring institution. People need to realize that and make that case, and make the case that that's why, if we want to survive as a country with a reasonable balance. I mean, Stephanie spent many years in Kansas. I don't think she would have been, or Missouri, excuse me, University of Missouri at Kansas City. You wouldn't have been there if there hadn't been an investment in higher education there. That was a public investment. That's just absolutely the way the country has been built up and the way it functions. So I think that's in many ways our strongest case. I want to come back to a question that was raised in the chat, which is, what do we do about the contingent workers? What do we do about the contingent faculty and all these people who are at risk? And I think it's a very important question in the short run. And I'll just say, look, In the short run, the worst thing you could do is to say to the contingent faculty, you're the ones who have to go into these underventilated classrooms with 100 students in them. This is I mean, it's quickly going to stop because infections will break out. I mean, it's now clear that this is not a healthy thing to do. It's clear to anybody who's looking at it. So it will not last long, but in the meantime, some people will get hurt before they realize this. What's the right thing to do? The right thing to do is to teach smaller classes and to do it in a safe way, which is, I have no objection to doing this online so long as it's done in a manageable way. And that means you need more people, which means you need to keep the contingent faculty and need to give them actually bigger, if they're willing to take on bigger workloads and earn more money, great. This is the way you handle this. This is the way you think in a forward-looking way. And then when you come to the end of it, you have, of course, a stronger body of faculty to carry the mission of the university forward. You let everybody go and then there's nobody there to teach those classes, you're ending up slitting your own throats, not only as a university, but as a community around the university. So I really do think in every way our non-tenure or contingent colleagues are central to what needs to be done now because Lord knows some of us are in very, relatively very good positions where there are not enough of us to carry the load that has to be carried in this environment, for sure.